The sun hung low over the prairie, casting long shadows across Eli Harding's ranch yard as he stood at the edge of the dusty road. His palms were damp inside worn gloves, his hat tugged low to shield his eyes from the blazing light. For months he had prepared for this moment, each day counting down toward the arrival of his mail-order bride. Her letters, careful and modest, had spoken of shared meals, quiet evenings, and a willingness to work beside him. After years of silence and solitude, Eli dared to. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, freshly washed, stiff against his neck. His boots were polished though cracked by years of use. Around him the land stretched wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that made a man crave the sound of another voice in his home. He imagined a woman stepping down from the wagon, slender, perhaps shy, holding her small bag with nervous fingers. He pictured himself offering his hand, steady and strong, and leading her toward the porch he had swept twice that morning. The creak of wheels reached him first. A cloud of dust rose against the horizon, shimmering in the heat as the coach came into view. Horses lathered in sweat pulled hard at their harnesses. Eli's heart beat quicker. He pressed the folded letter inside his vest, the one she had signed with hope and promise. This was the day his life was meant to change. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a swirl of grit. The driver climbed down, wiping his brow, muttering about the long ride. Eli barely heard him. His eyes locked on the door of the wagon as it creaked open. A figure appeared, framed by the shadow of the doorway. Smaller than he expected, slight in build. A young woman stepped carefully onto the wooden step, gripping the railing with steady hands. Her dress was plain, her bonnet tied loose around her chin, but when she lifted her face, Eli felt the ground tilt beneath him. She was not the woman from the letters. She was far younger. Barely grown, no more than 20. Her dark hair caught the sun, her eyes wide and searching, and when those eyes found his, something inside him stilled. There was a familiarity, sharp and undeniable. Eyes he had seen before, in the mirror each morning. The girl stepped down fully, her boots touching the dirt. The driver set her bag beside her and tipped his hat, leaving her standing in the road with the weight of dust and silence around her. She looked at Eli with a mixture of fear and certainty, then spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "Are you Eli Harding?" His throat tightened. "I am." She hesitated, as if the next words cost her more than the journey itself. Then, with a breath drawn deep, she said them. "I'm your daughter." The world seemed to narrow around him. The porch, the fields, the stagecoach, all blurred into a haze of disbelief. The letter in his vest, the plans he had built, dissolved like smoke. Before him stood not a bride, but blood. Flesh of his own, a truth he had never known until this moment. Eli's hand, half raised in greeting, fell useless at his side. His voice failed him. He could only stare, caught between shock and something deeper, a stirring ache that felt both foreign and painfully familiar. Eli moved stiffly, as though his body belonged to another man. He bent to lift her bag from the dirt, more to hide the trembling of his hands than out of habit. The leather was scuffed, the handle worn thin, like it had seen too many miles already. He set it against his boot and cleared his throat, but no words came. The girl stood with her fingers tangled in the ribbon of her bonnet, gaze flicking from him to the porch of the house behind. He saw the hesitation in her stance, the way her weight shifted as though she half expected to be sent back onto the wagon. "Come inside," Eli managed at last, the words dry as dust. He turned without waiting for her reply and strode towards the house, boots crunching across the packed earth. Each step felt heavy, measured. Behind him, he heard the faint tread of her lighter steps, quickened as if she feared he might change his mind. The porch boards groaned beneath his weight. He paused there, staring at the door he had polished that morning, its brass handle gleaming. How different the gesture felt now. He had imagined standing here with a bride at his side, a future in front of them both. Instead, the truth pressed against his ribs, sharp and unyielding. He opened the door and stepped aside. She entered cautiously, her eyes darting across the neat space, wooden table set with 2 chairs, freshly scrubbed floorboards, a loaf of bread resting on the counter. Eli had prepared the place to welcome someone he thought would share his life. Now it felt like a stage built for the wrong play. She removed her bonnet and held it against her chest. Her hair tumbled loose, dark and soft, framing a face that bore echoes of another. It was there in the curve of her cheek, in the shape of her mouth. Traces of a woman Eli had once loved, long ago. He swallowed hard, forcing his gaze away. "What's your name?" he asked, voice low. "Clara." The word came gently, like she had rehearsed it for this moment. "Clara Harding." The surname hit him like a stone. He gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles whitening. "I never knew," he said slowly. "Your mother? She never told me." Clara's eyes softened, though her posture remained guarded. "She thought it was best. But when she died last winter, I found the letters, the ones you wrote her years ago. I had to see for myself." Silence thickened between them, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Eli felt the weight of years pressing down, the loneliness he had tried to cure with the promise of a bride now tangled in a truth he could not escape. "You came here expecting a wife," Clara said quietly, almost apologetic. "And you got me instead." Her honesty cut through the air, sharp but steady. Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He sank into the chair, staring at the grain of the table. He had imagined companionship, warmth, a woman by his side. Instead, fate had delivered him a daughter, his own flesh and blood, unknown until now. And though shock still burned in him, he felt something shift, an ember buried deep within, flickering to life. The sky outside bled orange as the day slipped into evening. Eli set a lantern on the table, its glow soft against the wooden walls. He moved without thought, hands busy with simple tasks, slicing bread, ladling stew from the pot simmering since morning. He had cooked it for someone else, but now it would be for her. Clara sat at the far end of the table, posture straight, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes followed his movements, wary yet curious, as if each gesture revealed something about him she had come to discover. The silence was deep, stretching long enough that the clink of spoon against pot sounded louder than it should. He set a bowl in front of her, then one for himself, and sat down. Steam rose between them. For a time they ate in quiet, the crackle of the fire filling the space where words refused to come. It was Clara who finally broke the stillness. "I didn't know what you looked like." She spoke softly, as though afraid to break something fragile. "But when I saw you standing there, I recognized your eyes. They're mine too." Eli's spoon stilled. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers across the lamplight. The truth of it struck him. Her eyes mirrored his, the same steady gray, the same shape that stared back at him in the wash basin each morning. He had been blind to it in the shock, but now it was undeniable. He cleared his throat. "Your mother, she left without a word. I thought she'd chosen another life, far from me." His voice thickened. "I never knew she carried you." Clara's hands tightened around the bowl. "She spoke little of the past, but when she was ill, I found your letters hidden in a box. She had kept them, every one." She lowered her gaze. I needed to see who you were." Eli leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. Regret washed over him in waves, years of solitude heavy with what might have been. He searched for anger toward the woman who had left, but found only weariness. And as he looked at Clara, he felt a stirring of something else. Responsibility, long delayed. "You've come a long way," he said, softer now. "This land isn't kind to strangers." "I'm no stranger to hard ground," Clara replied. "I worked where I could, took in sewing, helped with harvests, but I couldn't stay after she was gone. There was nothing left for me." Her words struck a chord in him. The same emptiness had driven him to send for a bride. Different paths, but the same hunger for belonging. The stew cooled between them, yet neither seemed to notice. Eli studied her features, so young, yet shadowed with weariness beyond her years. She deserved better than silence. "You'll stay here," he said at last. "As long as you need." Clara's lips parted, surprise flashing across her face. Then, slowly, she nodded. The lantern flickered, casting soft light over the table. For the first time since her arrival, the silence felt less like a wall and more like a bridge beginning to form. Morning came clear and sharp, the prairie stretching wide beneath a sky rinsed clean by night winds. Eli was out splitting wood when he heard the crunch of wagon wheels on the road. Dust trailed behind as two neighbors approached, Mr. Crowley and his wife, Ruth. They had likely heard whispers of the bride's arrival. News traveled fast across empty country. Eli's stomach tightened. He had no words ready for what they would find. He wiped sweat from his brow, set the axe aside, and watched as the wagon rattled to a stop at the yard's edge. "Morning, Harding," Crowley called, climbing down with a broad grin. "Word is you've finally put an end to your bachelor days. Figured we'd come extend our congratulations." Ruth followed, clutching a basket wrapped in cloth. Her eyes scanned the porch, eager for a glimpse of the new wife. Eli's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Clara stepped from the doorway. She wore a simple dress borrowed from the trunk she carried, hair pinned neatly back. The light caught her face, softening her youth, and for a moment Eli felt the air around them still. She looked small against the frame of the house, but she held herself steady, chin lifted just enough to suggest quiet courage. Ruth's smile widened. "Well, there she is. My, aren't you lovely? You must be Mrs. Harding." Clara froze, the words striking sharp. She cast a quick glance toward Eli, eyes questioning. He forced a steady nod, though heat crept up his neck. "She's just arrived," he said quickly. "Still settling in." Crowley chuckled. "Takes time, don't it? A ranch is no easy place for a woman, but two hands make lighter work. You'll see the difference soon enough." Clara descended the steps, moving carefully, her composure unbroken. She accepted the basket with both hands, murmuring thanks. Her voice trembled, but Ruth didn't seem to notice. Eli watched her, torn between pride at her grace and guilt for the lie hovering unspoken. These were good people, neighbors who had stood by him through harsh winters. And here he was, letting them believe a falsehood because the truth felt too raw, too complicated to share. Crowley clapped Eli on the shoulder. "We'll let you be. Just wanted to welcome her proper. Supper at our place Sunday, if you're willing." "Appreciate it," Eli said, though his voice was thick. He kept his gaze on the ground until the wagon turned back down the road. When silence returned, Clara still stood in the yard, basket pressed against her chest. She looked at him, not with anger, but with a sadness that struck deeper. "You let them believe," she said quietly. Eli nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I wasn't ready to explain." Clara's hands tightened on the basket, then loosened. Neither am I. She turned and walked back into the house. Eli stood in the yard, the axe at his feet, the weight of unspoken truth pressing heavier than any log he might split. The basket sat untouched on the table, cloth folded back to reveal a loaf of bread and a jar of preserves. Neither Eli nor Clara had moved to eat. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, the silence stretched thin like wire ready to snap. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the wooden floorboards. The morning light streamed through the window, catching strands of her dark hair and softening her features. Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the weight of Crowley's words still pressing on his chest. Finally, Clara spoke. She never told me much about you, just that you were a man she once loved, and that she left before you ever knew I existed. Eli's throat tightened. He had imagined this conversation for years, but never with her, never with a daughter he had not known. We were young, he said slowly. Too young. She was restless, always looking beyond the horizon. I thought love would hold her here, but it wasn't enough. Clara's gaze lifted to him, steady and sharp. So she left you. He nodded once. Without a word. One morning she was gone, and all I had were the echoes of her voice in these rooms. I thought she had chosen a different life. I never imagined she carried you. Clara's eyes softened, though her shoulders remained tense. She carried more than me. She carried regrets. Sometimes I'd find her at night, sitting by the fire, staring at your letters. She kept them in a box, tied with ribbon. Even when she was sick, she wouldn't let me throw them away. Eli felt the breath leave his chest. A dozen winters of loneliness, each one colder than the last, and all the while she had kept his words. He turned to the window, staring at the endless stretch of land beyond. She was strong, Clara continued, voice lower now. But near the end, she was afraid. Afraid of what would happen to me once she was gone. That's why she told me to come here, to find you. The words cut deep, sharper than any blade. He had been angry at her absence for so long, but now he saw the truth. She had trusted him, in the end, even if she never gave him the chance while she lived. Clara shifted in her chair, folding her arms across her chest as if bracing against the weight of it all. I didn't come here to make trouble. I only wanted to see if you were real. If you were someone I could... She trailed off, searching for the word. Trust. Eli turned from the window, meeting her eyes. The likeness struck him again. The same steady gray, the same fire hidden beneath. He saw not just the woman he once loved, but something new, something his own. You're here now, he said quietly. That's enough. For the first time, Clara's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Not full, not certain, but enough to crack the silence that had bound them since her arrival. The preserves on the table caught the sunlight, glinting red as embers. Eli sat across from her, the space between them still wide, but no longer empty. The sun rose hard and bright, burning away the morning mist that clung to the fields. Eli had already been out with the cattle, moving them to fresh pasture, when he saw Clara step from the cabin. She wore one of the plain work dresses Ruth Crowley had sent over in the welcome basket, the hem brushing her boots, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hair was tied back, and in her hands she carried a pair of gloves too large for her small fingers. You don't have to, Eli called as she approached. He leaned against the fence rail, rope coiled at his side. This is rough work. Clara paused, tilting her head toward him. I didn't come all this way to sit idle. There was no challenge in her tone, only quiet resolve. Eli gave a small nod, then showed her how to test the fence posts, pressing each one to check for looseness. Her movements were tentative at first, but steady, and when she found one leaning, she looked to him for instruction. Together they braced it upright, tamping the earth down hard around the base. Hours passed in rhythm, the thud of hammer on wood, the scrape of wire pulled taut. Clara's hands blistered quickly, but she said nothing. Eli noticed, though. He caught her wince as she worked, the way her breath hitched when a splinter dug deep. Still she pressed on, jaw tight, determination written across her face. By midday, sweat darkened the fabric of her dress, strands of hair clinging to her cheek. Eli brought water from the trough, holding the dipper out. She drank in silence, eyes closed, throat working with each swallow. When she lowered it, he saw something new in her gaze. Not weariness, but a spark of pride. "You've done more in half a day than some hands I've hired in the past," he said quietly. Clara gave a small laugh, rough at the edges. "Mother always said hard work keeps the heart steady. I guess she was right." The name lingered in the air between them. For a moment both were still, bound by memory of the woman who connected them, yet absent from both their lives. Then Eli looked out across the pasture, cattle grazing peacefully under the noon sun. "You can stay," he said again, firmer this time. "This land can be as much yours as mine, if you want it." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes bright despite the dust on her face. The silence that followed was not heavy now, but steady, like the rhythm of hooves across open ground. Late afternoon shadows stretched long across the yard when another wagon rolled up. This time it was the McGraws, a younger couple from 2 ridges over. Their children tumbled from the back, running to chase chickens while their parents approached the porch. Eli set aside his work, wiping his hands on his trousers. Clara stood at the doorway, the day's labor still on her dress, though she held her posture straight. The McGraws exchanged quick glances before Ruth McGraw spoke, her voice kind but curious. "So this is your bride?" Her eyes lingered on Clara with open appraisal. "Word spread quick. You know how it goes?" Clara's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Eli felt the weight of the question press heavy, but before he could answer, Clara stepped forward. She offered a small smile, careful but steady. "I came from far away," she said, her voice even. "The road was long, but I'm here now." Her words were vague, yet strong enough to hold. Ruth's brow furrowed slightly, perhaps expecting more, but she let it rest. Her husband, Henry, gave a chuckle. "Doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is you've got 2 hands and a good head. This land eats up the lazy quick enough." Clara inclined her head. "I've worked since I could stand. I don't plan to stop." The answer drew approving nods. The McGraw children, tired of chasing chickens, darted back to the wagon, their laughter trailing behind. Ruth handed over a small jar of honey. "A gift," she said, "for sweetening your mornings." Clara accepted it carefully, murmuring thanks. Eli watched the exchange with quiet pride, though beneath it lay a thread of unease. Each neighbor who came with kind words also came with questions, and each time the truth was left unsaid. When the wagon finally turned down the road, the sun was already low, casting the sky in shades of gold. Clara still stood on the porch, honey jar in her hands, her shoulders stiff. "They'll keep asking," she said softly. Eli joined her, leaning against the post. "Then we'll keep answering the best we can, until we find the right way to tell it." Clara turned her face toward him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes carried the same gray light as his own. For now she had stood firm, and that was enough. The house was quiet after supper. The fire in the hearth burned low, shadows flickering across the walls. Eli sat at the table, oil lamp casting a circle of light over his worn hands. Across from him, Clara traced the rim of her cup, eyes lowered, lost in thought. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, coyotes called across the dark prairie, their cries carried by the wind. At last, Clara broke the silence. "I used to imagine what he might be like," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The father I never knew. Sometimes I'd picture a man strong enough to chase storms. Other times, someone quiet, who read books by the fire. Mother never gave me details. She just said you were a man she once loved." Eli's chest ached. He leaned back, staring into the flames. "I wanted a family. Thought I'd build it here, in these walls. But when she left, the house turned hollow. I never stopped wondering why." Clara's eyes lifted, sharp in the lamplight. "She wondered too, about you. I think part of her always wanted to come back, but she was too proud, or too ashamed." The words cut deep, but they softened something too. Eli drew a slow breath, steadying his voice. "And you? What did you want, coming here?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Not pity, not charity, just a place where I could belong. Somewhere that wasn't borrowed." The fire popped, sparks drifting upward. Eli studied her face, the lines of youth shadowed by grief, the resilience in her jaw. She was no longer the stranger who stepped off the wagon. She was his daughter, flesh and blood, and the truth of it weighed heavier than any brand or deed. "You do belong," he said firmly. "Here, with me." Clara blinked, her lashes catching tears she didn't let fall. She looked away, staring into the dark window where the reflection of the fire glowed faintly. Then maybe this house won't feel so empty anymore. They sat together in silence, the kind that carried understanding rather than distance. Outside, the coyotes' cries faded into the night, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the quiet pulse of something new taking root between them. 2 weeks later, Eli hitched the wagon for a supply run. Clara insisted on going along, despite his hesitation. The road to town was rough, dust rising in plumes with every turn of the wheels. She sat straight beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. When they arrived, the usual chatter of Main Street seemed to falter. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Clara felt the weight of every gaze, each one measuring, guessing, judging. She drew her shawl tighter but kept her chin high. Inside the general store, the silence deepened. Mrs. Dobbs, who prided herself on knowing every piece of gossip in 3 counties, leaned across the counter. Her sharp eyes darted from Eli to Clara. "Thought you were expecting a bride, Mr. Turner," she said, words sweetened with curiosity that cut like vinegar. "This young lady don't look like one." Eli's jaw tightened. He set the list of supplies on the counter without meeting her eyes. "This is Clara. She's with me. That's all that matters." The woman sniffed, unconvinced. "People are talking. They'll want to know who she really is." Before Eli could speak, Clara stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled against her shawl. "I am his daughter. My mother is gone. I came because I had nowhere else." The words hung in the air like a struck bell. Mrs. Dobbs blinked, taken aback. Whispers spread quickly through the room. Some faces softened, others grew skeptical, but none could ignore the courage with which Clara spoke. Eli placed a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder, steadying her. "That's the truth. Anyone who doubts it can answer to me." The room grew quiet again. Then Mr. Hanley, the blacksmith, cleared his throat. "If she's your kin, Eli, that's good enough. You've always been a straight man. That's worth more than gossip." Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Eli gave her shoulder a small squeeze before guiding her toward the door. As they stepped outside, the afternoon sun poured over them, warm and blinding. She glanced at him, eyes shining with both fear and pride. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, I did, Eli answered. His voice carried no hesitation. That's what fathers do. The word lingered between them, heavy yet comforting, like a door opening to a room neither had dared to enter until now.